Humans, Nature and Conservation in New Zealand. This story was part of a larger culture inquiry aimed to support the social business Sports Squad in understanding the relationship between New Zealand and conservation and the role of culture within that. This particular insight was used to understand the different perspectives Maori and Pākehā have, and how can the business communicate with both? Have you ever entered a reservation and felt like you were stepping into another world? For example, while hiking for 4 days with my friends in a park in New Zealand, we were told that we had to carry our rubbish with us at all times. We were also told to walk only on the designated path so as not to disturb the protected environment of the native birds. There are many places like that as New Zealand organisations try to reverse the decline of endangered native birds. But the concept of having a protected environment like a sanctuary or reservation implies that what is outside of it can be left unprotected, and implies that as long as we are good and follow the rules inside the particular environment, we can be as loose as we can with what is outside of it. It means that we put nature into two different boxes, one that we use and one that we protect. And if we look at the spaces that we live in, how big is the size of one versus another? What if we found a way to live in nature without needing to protect special places, as every place is a special place? This is a story of an island in the Pacific called New Zealand and the relationship of its Maori and Pākehā inhabitants with nature. There is a connection between how we think about nature and how we think we and our world came to be. Let's meet John. John lives in Europe. In his culture, he considers God as the ultimate being. At the beginning, God first created the first man, John's ancestor, and then created nature and put it at the service of man as a resource to make man's life easier. For John's ancestors, nature was wild and dangerous, and it needed to be tamed and controlled. As they invented to and learned how to live better, nature stopped being dangerous and became a resource for man to use to make life more comfortable. Nowadays, John and others like him are worried that they have hurt nature through usage, and they need to think of new ways to protect and replenish what they have left. Let's meet Tupi, who is Maori from the Polynesian Islands. In his culture, a long time ago, Mother Earth and Father Sky lived in a tight embrace, and there was no space between them. They birth 70 kids. One of them, Tani, decides to separate his father and mother, thus creating Earth. Tani therefore became the father of the birds, the forest, and humans, including Tupi. So, in the Maori culture, humans are part of nature and brothers of plants and birds. By living in nature and observing its impacts, Tupi has a responsibility to take from nature only what is necessary and protect and preserve its life force. Kaitia ki tanga. New Zealand was formed 80 million years ago. It was a place where no mammal existed, so the bird population became the highest on the food chain and diversified a lot versus other ecosystems. The birds lived in a non-mammalian paradise until the 13th century. Tupi's ancestors arrived. They brought the Polynesian rat and dog and the yams and the kumara. They started changing the land to settle there and started hunting the birds for food. As they also wanted to protect the birds, they built rules around hunting them only in a special time and only when they were fat enough for the pot. 3 centuries later, John's ancestors discovered New Zealand with their ships for trading, but they didn't decide to settle there until the 18th century, when John's ancestors arrived first with a small group of people. They meet Tupi's ancestors, and they both sign the Treaty of Waitangi, agreeing to live together in peace and to respect the principles of living in nature while taking care of nature, kaitiakitanga. In the following years, many more people arrived in New Zealand. They built roads and cities and developed trades and started agriculture. As modernity advances, they'd cut down the native bush trees to make room for the roads and the cities. New Zealand's economy flourishes. Tupi's people move to the cities and start adapting to this new way of life. As a result of cutting the trees, the native birds start disappearing and sanctuaries begin to appear in an attempt to protect a part of nature while modernity advances. An essential element of the relationship of Tupi with nature was the fact that he was living in nature. To practice kaitiakitanga, one needs to observe the cycles of nature and see when to harvest and when to plant and when to consume. With the move to the cities and development of commerce, that knowledge weakened as there were fewer occasions to observe the cycles of nature in action. In comparison to other countries that now have to look back at how they were built, modernity against nature and reflect on ways to preserve it and replenish it, New Zealand is still early on that journey. And what New Zealand will do depends on the nature of the relationship it has with nature. Is nature only a resource to be used by humans and protected and sanctuaries? Or is it a brother-sister with the same rights and obligations of humans? In March 2017, New Zealand was the first country in the world to give the River Wanganui human rights, and may be making a stand to where it sits in this relationship. But as its economy grows, thus fueling advances in modernity, New Zealand is challenged to think on how to manage those advances in a harmonious way with nature. How can we build cities and roads without destroying nature? How can we develop an advanced civilization in a way that does not reduce nature and birds only to be experienced in sanctuaries? How can we continue to treat nature not as a resource, but as an equal?